I think we're good to go. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this KHT King's Head Theatre live session online. So first of all, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the King's Head Theatre for inviting me to take part. I think this is a really exciting project, and it's really good to be sharing our thoughts about creativity, shows, productions we've done, productions we're going to do online during this time when we can't do it in person as we would normally. So that's great. Thank you, King's Head Theatre. So I would like to start off by just introducing myself to you all. Some of you will know me. You might have seen me on stage at the King's Head Theatre. And for others of you, I will be a complete novelty and you'll be like, who's that woman? So here is an introduction to me. My name is Becca Marriott, and I am an opera singer and a librettist, dramaturge, and adapter of operas. What that basically means is, hold on a minute, we have props. I will take one of these, massive thick opera score there, and I will turn it into one of these. Yeah, it's a tiny little English libretto and an adaptation cut down for a theatre like the King's Head to perform. So that's my background. That's a bit about me. I first got involved with the King's Head Theatre way back in 2012, performing there when it was the home of Opera Up Close as Tosca in a production for Opera Up Close. So my relationship with the King's Head Theatre has been very long, very creative and very productive. And the first opera that I adapted for the King's Head Theatre was back in 2016, and that was a new adaptation of La Bohème, in which Mimi is a heroin addict rather than a lady dying of tuberculosis. And that production transferred to the West End and was nominated for an Olivier Award, which was fantastic. Real amazing spotlight on fringe and studio opera, which is so often overlooked in the grander scheme of opera. So now my life is spent singing, writing, creating new operas, and I recently set up my own opera company using the skills that I've learnt and honed working at the King's Head, and that is the Opera Makers. And we are currently working on a new opera in partnership with Shine, which is a cancer charity that supports people who are diagnosed with cancer under the age of 50. So that's a really exciting project that we're working with. So all of these skills that we build up and that we work on through our work at the King's Head, they really bring us forward in our life and change the way we see ourselves as artists and creators. So that's where I am now in my career. So it's a really brief introduction to me. So this session is going to be a spotlight on La Traviata. La Traviata is an incredibly famous opera by Giuseppe Verdi. And in 2018, I was approached by Helena Jackson, who is a wonderful director, with the concept of setting this opera in a strip club. And that's what we did. We created this new version of La Traviata, and that premiered at the King's Head in 2018, just with a 4-person cast set in a grimy strip club. And there were many reasons that we did that. We wanted to explore the sociopolitics, we wanted to explore how it could be really relevant today, and I'm going to talk about all of that throughout the course of this little chat. But before we get on to that, I just want to encourage everyone to ask questions. So you see that you can leave comments. I'm going to be monitoring them. Apologies to people on Instagram. You're getting a lot of my profile, but creatives and desks never did marry up. So we've got an interesting setup in the room. I've got one there, one there, one there, one there. So Instagram, you're on a music stand, and Facebook, you're on a chair. Welcome to my music room. So questions. Do ask questions, and I will be trying to keep up with them as we go along, and any that I miss out or haven't looked at, I will try and come back to you at the end of the session. So let's crack on. Traviata. So I showed you my props. This is La Traviata. Very old, battered score, and you can see all of the little paper clips in there. from when we adapted it, all of the material that we kept and all of the material that we cut out. So I'd like to talk a little bit about why adapt an opera and why adapt this opera. Why did we choose to do this? What was this project all about? So opera itself is actually a surprisingly political form. And Traviata is no different. Verdi was a really political man. He was a really active thinker, and he was very active in the Risorgimento in Italy, which means that he was really involved with politics and he wanted to change the world. He wanted to change society. And a lot of his operas are very nationalist. Now, Traviata isn't. Traviata is a very domestic story. It tells the story of a courtesan who falls in love with a young man called Alfredo. And because of the social standing of Alfredo, his sister's life would be ruined. She wouldn't be able to marry the man that she wants to marry were Alfredo to continue this frowned upon relationship with the courtesan. And so the courtesan's father comes and breaks up the relationship. Now, when Alfredo discovers this, he becomes furious and he denounces her at a grand party in front of all of her friends and her former lovers and her other lover who pays the bills, basically. And this all happens within a framework of the courtesan Violetta dying of tuberculosis. So throughout the piece, we see her getting increasingly sick. And then the final act of the opera, she is on her deathbed and she passes away just as Alfredo and his father return to beg her forgiveness. They realise the wrong they have done. So that's the plot of Traviata in a nutshell. Now, as I said, Verdi, he was really big on composing these nationalist operas that dealt with the theme of giving Italy its unified nationalistic identity. But La Traviata is about something else. La Traviata, at its core, is about hypocrisy. And it's about the relationship between the upper classes and the perceived lower classes, the courtesan and her coterie, and these wealthier middle and upper class men and other women. And it's how they look down upon her, despite the fact that they're more than happy to pay her for her services. So at the core of this opera, there is this theme of social hypocrisy. Now, when you think about adapting any opera, when I think about adapting any opera, and this goes for all of the operas I've worked on, my key into creating an adaptation is always, what is the core theme of this opera? That's going to really guide how we put it on stage, what we want to show, the choices we make, the characters we keep in, the way that we focus the text, and the overall concept. So when Helena proposed this idea of setting this in a strip club, this for me was a really fantastic marriage of ideas. Here we have an opera which is about the way that we look down on people. It's about hypocrisy, it's about the use of services, and that's the thing that is so present in our daily lives today. It's so present in society still. So this is why we chose to set Traviata in this environment. And we also wanted to really highlight the politics of the opera. So we chose to make Gemont, who is Alfredo's father, we chose to make him a politician. And not just any politician. It was really important to keep this highlight on hypocrisy. So despite some complaints from people in the audience, including some politicians who came to see the show, I will mention no names, we made him a Labour Party politician. Because the whole idea behind this was that he breaks up this relationship that his son is having to save his own career. We got rid of the idea of the daughter. It's outdated. So to save his own career, he will break up this relationship with his son has with Violetta, despite the fact that he himself is using the services of the girls in the strip club and has been for a long time. And the idea of making him a left-wing Labour politician is we have the feeling as the audience that underneath this, he is a good man. He has got, he's got social ideas in his heart, but the practice and the preaching are very different. And this was all to bring out this idea of hypocrisy. And as I said, keep that in mind. Whenever I look to adapt an opera, it's all about picking the theme, keeping true to the theme, and making that as powerful as it possibly can be in whatever I do. So that's why we chose that theme. And when we explore Traviata more deeply, it's very clear how this theme plays out musically and dramatically. So, for example, Verdi chose to make Violetta, the courtesan, a hugely sympathetic character. And that's evident in the music he gives her. She has these beautiful, lyrical, floating, glorious, powerful phrases throughout the opera. In the actual... Excuse my door, I don't know what's happening there. In the actual novel, which the opera is based on, she's a far colder character, actually. She's far more cynical, far more nasty in many ways. This whole opera is based on a novel by Alexander Dumas called The Lady of the Camellias. And we were very interested in what Verdi does musically to make this character the most sympathetic character she can be. So that, again, plays into why we were attracted to bringing out this theme of hypocrisy, making her a heroine. Now, there's lots of things when you look to adapt an opera that you have to also lose. So if you're taking an opera that was written in the middle of the 19th century, like the Traviata, some of the ways those themes play out are obviously completely different from the way they play out in society today. So in the original opera, she is dying of tuberculosis. Now, we chose to get rid of this idea because it's not something that is relevant to our lives today. It's not a killer of the poor within society. Now, interestingly, since all this happened in 2018, we've had this pandemic, which we now see is largely affecting people of a lower social and economic class. And I think it's fascinating that this may be the tuberculosis of 2020. But obviously, we weren't clairvoyant, and when we wrote this in 2018, that was not something that was coming to mind. So we got rid of the idea of that. And what we did instead was we made the final scene of the opera all about Violetta and all about Violetta killing herself. So we removed the power from the disease and we gave it to Violetta. So we're taking again this idea, remembering this central theme of hypocrisy, and we're saying, well, how can she have power? How can she fight back? How can she provoke guilt? So we leave her at the end having overdosed and killed herself. And that is such a powerful moment of drama and realization for the audience of what this hypocrisy does, how it tears people apart and how it ruins lives. So 2 things that we think about then when we're adapting opera. When we're adapting opera, we look for the key theme and we look for all the things that don't quite work and we think, how can we change these? How can we update them? How can we make them relevant? So the TB to the suicide. and the daughter to the career in politics. So these are the ways, these are the keys into creating a really true to the composer's intentions adaptation of an opera. Key themes and ways that we can update things that don't quite sit comfortably. So the major one, which I haven't talked so much about yet, is taking the idea of the courtesan and turning her into a stripper working in a pole dancing venue. This is such a bold idea for an opera production. I don't know how many people who've joined us today are opera buffs, how many people have come to opera, how many people go to the Royal Opera House, how many people go to the E&O, how many people go to Glyndebourne, how many people go to smaller fringe productions, Grimebourne, the Arcola. What sort of opera people have seen? I don't know that. But our traditional vision of opera is that this is something quite stagey. It's something very staid. Performers tend to stand and they tend to sing and deliver. And the idea that you're going to take this opera singer who's got to sing the role of Violetta and have her dance on a pole while doing that is extraordinary. And I think whenever you go to adapt a piece, you have to be doing it thinking, how am I going to make the most impact, not only in terms of the storytelling, but in terms of taking the art form to new people and in terms of changing people's opinion about that art form. So how can we make opera much more flexible, literally and metaphorically? How can we make it more exciting? How can we make it more dangerous? So, as I said, the Bohème in 2016, we had Mimi delivering the whole of her last tragic scene, fitting from heroin withdrawal and injecting herself in the final moments with heroin using an iPhone charger as a tourniquet. So how can we do that with Traviata? How can we make people think differently about opera and opera singers and the art form? And the idea was amazing. We're going to have an opera singer pole dancing. We're going to have an opera singer stripping. This is going to be something really unique and dangerous in such a small space. And I actually sang the role of Traviata, and the journey into that character of Violetta, in La Traviata, and the journey into that character and learning to pole dance and working very closely with a pole dancer, incredibly talented pole dancer called Iris Sparkles, who teaches pole but also works in strip clubs. Incredible first-hand experience of this life, was so eye-opening. It was physically challenging. It changes how you are as a performer, because you have to really assimilate the physicality to your vocality as well. So there's a huge amount of work to be done, but it's so eye-opening. And I think one of the things that really was opened my eyes through the process was meeting somebody like Iris, who was so strong and so powerful and so feminist in her approach to her work, really influenced how I felt about Violetta, about the character. And not only in our new adaptation, but if I were to go and sing a traditional Violetta, it changes the relationship between how you think about that character, because she has no shame about being a courtesan. It's how the rest of society see her. And again, it all comes back to that core theme of hypocrisy. Let's say Gary Bland has commented, amazing core strength. Well, to be honest, so one of the things I've been doing on lockdown, Gary, is I've been having a baby. So talking about amazing core strength, and getting back into singing after having a baby, you realise how much you use those lower abdominal muscles and that core to engage with singing. And there's it's a road back to that coordination. And it can be a quick road, it can be a long road, but it definitely informs your body. Singing is very much about your core strength in your body. which is probably about the only thing it has in common with pole dancing. So at least there was one thing that in this journey we could hold on to. Thank you, Gary. So I think this is one of the things that, you know, singers often even don't realise about themselves until they're asked to engage with a different physical activity. And engaging with the activity of pole dancing makes you realise how you're holding yourself, how you're using your body, how you're going to get that physical strength to sing while physically doing something else, how it can be helpful as well as a hindrance, because sometimes, you know, it's really difficult to sing a beautiful phrase of music curled in a ball, lying down, physically tense. As I say, I also played Mimi in the production in 2016, and having that, you know, that physical attitude of I'm twitching because I haven't had my heroin dose today. How is that going to inform my body as I sing? So I think there's an amazing amount that opera singers and the opera world can learn from other disciplines. And I think that's, you know, again, it's another thing to think about when we adapt operas. How can we have disciplines inform each other? And how can we create something that's more whole? Thank you, Martin, as well. Great that you're a mum. So it's a really interesting journey in adaptation, I think, is what I'm trying to say. Does anyone have any questions, either on Instagram or on Facebook? Anyone? Before I carry on rambling away about the Traviata? Give you a minute. Nothing yet. So, how to wrap up all of this and say something, you know, meaningful about this opera and the process of opera adaptation? Well, throughout today's session, the focus has been Traviata. It's just been a chat about that process. But what I really want people to take away is an understanding of why adaptation is important and why adaptation is interesting and how it can be done in a way that respects the composers and respects the librettists of the original. And so I come back to these key things in an adapter's mind, is that we want to think, who was this composer? What were they about? And what are they trying to say in this opera? And that often means looking at the source material that they chose and how they changed it. Because what Verdi is trying to say in the Traviata is very different from what Alexander Dumas is trying to say in The Lady of the Camellias. Verdi is far more political. And once you pick that up, that idea, you have a little bit of license to say, well, if he wanted to do that, if he wanted to make this political, if he wanted to cast his eye on social hypocrisy, if that's what he wanted to do, then I know how to do that for an audience today. And that can inform decisions all along the way as you adapt. And it will make sure that you are true to what the composer was trying to achieve. And then it's about finding the things that are different, finding the things that are in that opera that don't work nowadays. They don't work. And it's about solving them. Because I think it's very dissatisfying for an audience whenever they see an opera and there are corners that don't make sense. You think, well, why? That doesn't work. You know, I mean, if we'd have kept Violetta dying of tuberculosis, for example, people would be going, well, why didn't she go to hospital? You know, why didn't she go to the doctors? Why didn't she get some antibiotics? So that's the other thing. You've got to sort that out because it's so disappointing if you don't. And then the final thing is, how am I informing and building the art form? How am I making it more accessible? How am I making it more interesting? How am I making it more dangerous? how am I going to change how people think about this art form? And that's where it comes to things like pole dancing, heroin addiction, the violence of a production like Tosca, making that more real, making it more punchy, making it more in your face. That's the three sort of golden elements to creating adaptation. And that's why we do it. Because if you get those three things right, you're going to create a wonderful story that's true to the music, that's powerful, that informs people about what opera is, but also has the power to change people's minds about what opera is. And if nobody has any questions? No questions at the moment. I'd like to say a final thing about opera and storytelling before I just wrap up and say thank you to all and remind you about the work that the King's Head's doing and my own company's doing. And that is storytelling in opera, as anywhere, is only successful if we love the characters. How many successful artists move? That's from Gary. How many successful artists move? I don't quite understand the question. Do you mean emotionally? Oh, how many successful artists move from MT into opera successfully? Is there a middle ground? I'll come to that in a minute. I'll just finish my thought. But what I was saying is that you have to love the characters, because if you don't love the characters, you don't care when they die. So another thing that I've always tried to do in all of the adaptations that I've done and will continue to do is inject humour at the start. It's really important that we laugh. It's really important that we enjoy these characters. So for example, the moment in Traviata where Alfredo in our adaptation takes over the piano in the strip club and starts playing the Libiamo. It's a moment of humour. The moment where he's made to feel uncomfortable by his father. Well, you have to laugh. You have to enjoy the first act. Because if you don't love the characters, you don't care when they die. So that's the other thing that's on the strand of the bow of adaptation. Now to Gary's question. How many successful artists move from musical theatre into opera successfully? Is there a middle ground? Well, it's a really interesting question, actually. I can't put a number on it, but musical theatre voices and musical theatre shows tend to split roughly into two categories. I mean, there's more categories now with the rise of musicals like Hamilton, which is, a very different musical style. Musical theatre tends to split into legit or legitimate musical theatre and more pop musical theatre. And some musicals, I don't know how many people on Instagram have seen Wicked. Some musicals even have both voice types within the same musical. So you have Glinda, who is definitely a legit musical theatre singer, and then you have Alphaba, who is a much more pop voice. A lot of belting and power. Now, legit singers often come from a classical music background. It's a far more classical sound. Thinking of things like Rodgers and Hammerstein, sort of Gilbert and Sullivan as well, which is sort of opera come musical theatre sort of style of singing. It's that legit musical theatre singing. And there is crossover. I mean, I've worked with a number of singers who've done work in musical theatre and have moved into opera, particularly Gilbert and Sullivan. But if you've got the more pop voice, the belt voice that's a lot lower, you're much less likely to move into opera because it's a completely different vocal technique. But the legit musical theatre voice is not too far off the opera voice, especially some lighter soprano voices. So I think it's more common than people think. And then B Bell 7. Do you find the modern adaptations are attracting new people to opera? And indeed, are you finding traditional opera goers are not keen? That vastly depends. I think whenever you adapt, you're going to find lovers and haters. And it also depends a lot on the venue. So, for example, putting an opera like Traviata or any opera into the King's Head is going to attract a different audience, because you're going to get the audience that likes that venue, that feels comfortable in that venue. So you do get new audiences, you do get new opera goers. You also get people who maybe have said to a friend, maybe said to a relative, I hate opera, I'm not going to the opera. And the relative goes, well, come to this opera, because this will change your mind. And I have experienced that as a performer and as an audience member. I actually went to see the other cast in my own production of the Traviata at the King's Head. And I was sitting behind a couple who'd clearly gone to the opera. Maybe he knew something about it, she didn't, or maybe he'd dragged her out on a first date. You know, this is culture. Come and see some culture in a pub. It'd be really comfortable, it'd be fun. And I heard her turn around to him and go, oh, I didn't realise opera was so disgusting. And I thought, that's great, because you've learned something. That was in Tosca, so it was a really violent moment when Scarpia is suggesting that he will rape Tosca. And to have people have that visceral reaction, you know that they're engaging with the story on a level that they might not do in the Royal Opera House in a massive space when this is all in Italian. So it's really interesting. So I think the adaptations do attract different audiences, and I think they can change people's views about opera. The other way around, opera goers not so keen. Totally depends on the opera goer. I have lots of opera buff friends and teachers who go, oh, I hate the idea of adaptation, I don't want to go. And I have lots who love it. They absolutely love it. And I think you always find that in the reviews of big tragic operas when they're staged in adaptation in smaller venues. You always find that there are some critics who will go, this is fantastic, they're doing a great thing. And there are some critics who will be absolutely dead against the show from the moment that they walk in the door. So again, it so depends on the person. So depends on the person. I think with more comic, lighter-hearted operas, Gilbert Sullivan, Donizetti, I think it's often easier to sway people who aren't keen on adaptation, because they somehow feel that these lighter comic operas aren't so sacred. So I think there is, there's some difference between the different people who come and see them. We've actually gone over our time. But I wanted to answer your questions, so thank you very much for those. And this is just to say, before I sign off, that thank you very much for joining. I hope there was something interesting in there about adaptation and how we go about it and how we went about it specifically with Traviata and how that felt as a singer and performer. I need to remind you that the KHTOnline is happening every weekday at 1:00. So you can join some amazing... You can join some amazing artists sharing their experiences. Chip shop opera, make mine a double portion. Yes, okay. Maybe we'll do the opera at a chip shop. Maybe the ring cycle in a chip shop. That'd be great. So every day at 1:00, King's Head Online sessions. Please do check them out. And for other sessions, please check out the King's Head Theatre socials. So Instagram, Facebook, it's all on there. Join some of the conversations. Finally, just a shout out to say, if you are so interested, I, as I said, have set up a new opera company that is the Opera Makers, and you can find us on theoperamakers.com and join up to our mailing list as well if you're interested in the work that we're doing. Hopefully in the future, hopefully when the theatres reopen, it would be lovely to see some of you there. Thank you very much for joining and have a great day. Bye.